Welcome back. The EFF says it will study the judgment by the Western Cape High Court, which dismissed the party's bid to stop the implementation of the fuel levy increase. The hike was announced in the budget speech and comes into effect at midnight. The party argued that the increase unfairly targets the working class and the poor, who are already grappling with rising living costs and stagnant wages and deepening economic hardships. Let's now speak to the EFF senior researcher, Dr. Gumani Tshimomola, who's joining us for this conversation. Dr. Tshimomola, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. I note in that statement that you had issued yesterday, you did indicate that we will study the judgment in detail and reserve our right to pursue further legal avenues. Does this mean that there is a possibility of still seeing this matter through the courts?
No, good morning, Aldrin, and all newsroom viewers at home, and thank you very much for having us. Look, however disappointing this case outcome has been, we had expected it. We have not had a fair run in the Western Cape High Court in the past, so it's quite a mixed and a difficult terrain. We have to look at the entire budgeting process, and part and parcel of doing that is to take the powers of taxation back to Parliament, because what has been happening in the past 30 years, partly because of the ANC majority, is that the Minister of Finance and the National Treasury have been allowed to almost run the budgeting process on their own. And this has led to some of things like this, where they are able to increase general taxation, and that is imposed to all of us, particularly the poor and the working class, without going to Parliament, without a money bill, and without having debated the matter in Parliament and given a chance to those who are democratically elected to vote on taxation. And what happened here is exactly that. They are going to impose a tax on us, which we never debated and never voted on. Parliament is still considering the fiscal framework. It has not been adopted, yet there's a tax that is being implemented starting from today. That is what we are challenging with the entire budgeting process, and we have to relook at this process. When we get a written judgment, we're going to study those things, and we have to go and look at whether the best possible way to review this and put it aside will be through amendments of the legislation, or we'll have to go to court to continue to challenge this. Yeah. But there's quite a number of court cases that has happened in the Constitutional Court. We make reference to Mark Shuttleworth case, Newzroom Afrika case, which we need to go and get clarity from the Constitutional Court as to which taxation can the minister implement through notices and which ones should be dealt with through Parliament money bills amendment processes.
Yeah, I just quickly want to take a few steps back. So with the application that was brought before the High Court, there was a Part A and a Part B to it. And the Part A was around the urgency of the matter, which has been dismissed by the court. So you haven't really dealt with the merits of the issues that you are raising as the EFF. For now, does it mean that you're no longer pursuing Part B?
Well, we got oral judgment yesterday to dismiss the case, right? So when you argue Part A, you need to then give an overview explanation as to why this case matter. And to do that, you are able to use Part B, which you later have to take to court. So once we get a written judgment, we'll then be able to look at the judge's rationality as to why they dismissed it, and they did not think it's urgent that we should prevent a taxation without representation imposed through a government notice by the Minister of Finance. So it's quite unclear at the moment as to what is it that they used, because the minister's argument really, if you look at all 4-5 key praise that the minister has brought to the court, one, it's not urgent because the EFF said for 5 days with the matter, which is not true. We took the matter, the first meeting happened after the budget speech, which was on Friday. The budget speech was tabled on Wednesday. We went to the committee meeting and pleaded with the minister to reconsider this approach of introducing it before there's an amendment to some form of money bills, which he says will only happen later in November. That's one of the examples which shows you that there was never really an engagement with the matter in terms of what the minister was praying for. The other issue, he says that the EFF has accepted that he can impose taxation without a money bills amendment, because for the past 10 years, we have never said anything about the fuel levy, which is not true. If you look at all the budgets that former ministers, including these ministers, have tabled in the National Assembly, the EFF has never accepted any budget that was tabled by the National Treasurer or the minister as a proposal. We have always called for amendments. Those are just two examples to demonstrate that it was very difficult for us to then prey on the judges to say, the minister is taxing us when there is no legislation in place, relying on a 1964 Apartheid Act, which by now it's outdated, but it has not happened in the past 30 years where we engage meaningfully because the ANC has always abused its majority in parliament and makes it difficult. So we are coming from that background. So we have to look at their written judgment as to why they dismissed the case. We know already the minister's case is very weak. The reasons provided for are unacceptable. So if we don't find a meaningful way of engaging this in parliament, we'll then be left with no choice but to continue with Part B, but it will be much more nuanced, detail, and there are some ongoing cases which we'll have to also assess as to whether these cases can be won or we continue with our case alone.
Yeah. Then there's the other part that you just mentioned now, which I find quite interesting as well, and maybe you can explain to us how something like this happens. So there's a proposal, the budget is a proposal that the minister makes to members of the National Assembly. Then there is going to be the breakaway with the various finance committees to deal with what has been proposed and also dealing with the fiscal framework. And then the fiscal framework is then supposed to go back to the House, and then the House debates on it, and then the House then votes on it. But part of the proposal was this 15 cents and 16 cents increase in petrol as well as diesel. It was a proposal. How then does it come into effect on Wednesday when it was still a proposal and Parliament hasn't really adopted that budget that makes that proposal?
Well, Adrian, that's an important question you're asking. And this is exactly what we're saying. The South Africa budgeting process is broken, and precisely why the National Treasury for the past 30 years has had this free rein in terms of deciding proposals to actually be policy and implement them even before they have a necessary legislation in place. Let me take you back. One of the arguments, if you remember, with VAT increase that the DA was arguing is that if the minister can announce an increase of a VAT rate from 14 to 15 or 15.5 or 17 without an actual amendment on the VAT Act, but simply by announcement, it means that we are now disregarding Section 77 of the Constitution, which says any taxation that should happen will be through a money bills that must be debated in Parliament. So the difficulty we have is that in the past 30 years, the minister will announce certain things because they had some form of a guarantee that once they bring this legislation in Parliament, it will carry favor with majority because the ANC had majority. So even when we were questioning their failure to follow money bills properly in the past 10 years as the EFF, our challenge was always that it looked like a futile exercise because at the end of the day, they're going to come with majority and then rubber stamp what the minister has introduced but already implementing, which shows you that the system is broken. They are not following the money bills processes and they are not following the constitution as things stand now. You're absolutely correct. Yesterday, the Standing Committee on Finance meeting looked at the draft report, which is considering the fiscal framework proposal. At the moment, everything contained in the budget and in the fiscal framework remain a proposal. So today, when the committee meets, they're going to adopt that report. When they adopt the report, it does not mean the budget is adopted. It doesn't mean the full levy is accepted. We could very well go to the House and there's change of heart by other members of Parliament. But we know that currently with the setting of the numbers in Parliament, the DA and the ANC are agreeing on what they're going to do, which shows you again that they're going to use their majority to then rubber stamp the proposal, but the minister will already be implementing some of the things that he announced. So you have a minister of finance here who can tomorrow come and say, I'm increasing the fuel levy by 4 rand because there's nothing stopping the minister to only adjust the fuel levy in line with inflation. Tomorrow when he says he's increasing it by 4 rand and he wants to collect 20 billion, there is nothing any of us can do about it if we continue with the mentality that the Treasury has these powers to impose taxation without representation and parliament declaration through passing of legislation.
And just to be clear, how's the EFF voting today and how's the EFF voting next week if the fiscal framework is adopted by the committee?
Look, we made contributions yesterday when we were looking at the draft fiscal framework and revenue proposal report of the Standing Committee on Finance. It was a joint committee between the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. So we're expecting the meeting, when it starts at 10 o'clock today, we're expecting that there is some support that perhaps this fuel levy, similarly to VAT, it's something that our people cannot afford. There is some submissions which we receive from the public to indicate that the minister is complaining about a 3.1 billion. We think he can go find it somewhere. Should there be some support to that? And the fuel levy is not supported by the majority of the committee members, and we move forward with a report to the National Assembly that does not include the fuel levy. Also, the issue of personal income tax inflationary adjustment. So if we're able to get some support around those two issues, it means when we go to the National Assembly, we may support some elements of the report by the committee, for example, the one which reject the fuel levy and the one that adjust the personal income tax inflationary adjustment, and all those tax brackets are now in line with inflation by 4.5%. Then it means we'll support that report, but categorically. There are still issues which we don't accept that the minister has brought forward. The minister never listened to all political parties who gave him proposal in terms of alternative revenue sources. We said there must be wealth tax and other form of tax that he must consider. That did not happen. So we'll support, but categorically, and we'll still reject the entire fiscal framework because we don't think it's a necessary intervention given the economic crisis we're facing.
Dr. Tshimomola, please make this make sense. So the committee meets today, and there's a possibility that the EFF, of course, we know is against a fuel levy hike. So if the committee adopts the report but says that we're not in support of the fuel levy that goes into effect at midnight, what does this all mean?
Well, that's what we were warning the committee about yesterday, to say there's quite a number of uncertain things which we should be very careful about. Remember, the risk here is that we put the entire budget process at uncertainty by allowing such things to happen. And that's why it should not happen. If the committee says that we reject the fuel levy that the minister has proposed, the minister can't decree, he can only propose. If we reject that fuel levy, it means when the report gets adopted by the National Assembly, everything else that must happen going forward, the division of revenue bill, the appropriation bill, even taxation bills, all of them, they must be consistent with the adopted fiscal framework, meaning that there is no way that you can then continue with a fuel levy when the National Assembly has voted against it. So those are the complications which we were trying to bring to the attention of the court yesterday. With all the knowledge we have about the court, we had hoped that in this instance, perhaps they will see it differently. But that's the confusion that will come out of it, and we will never get our money back as...
And that's the point. You won't get the money back because that was the argument that was made in the case that the DA as well as the EFF had brought against the VAT hike, that once that money is gone, the money is gone. There's no way to recover that money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the challenge we're having. Hence, the urgency of the matter to say that you still have 24 hours to could then send out a notice to say the fuel levy is not increasing, it's going to remain as it is. The 16 cents on petrol is going to not be affected. The 15% on diesel is not going to be affected. That's what we're hoping, that the agency part of it gets implemented so that in future we're all certain, because you can't have a budget that has so many uncertainties. This is the third budget. There's a VAT issue that was withdrawn. Now there's a fuel levy issue, which if we spend money from today with that increase for the minister to collect his 3.1 billion, we're never going to get that money back as customers.